And what I want to tell you this morning is it's good news for Team Trump. By the way, Senator Vance will be along later in the show. We got a lot of great people coming up today. Matt Continetti, Mary Catherine Ham. J.D. Vance will be here in the second hour of today's show to talk about the campaign momentum, which is clearly, I think, clearly swung back to Trump. We had two polls come in yesterday. In North Carolina, Trump has gone up. I'm never really worried about North Carolina for reasons that if you listen to Ruthless Podcast, you'll understand. I promoted the Ruthless Podcast from yesterday because they went through piece by piece all the polling data on the first day after Labor Day, which is the official start of the presidential campaign season. And I agree with them. North Carolina is not in doubt. Georgia is a swing state, and people in Georgia have to turn out. They have to get their friends to show up, and they have to go along with the new alliance between the governor and Donald Trump. They've gotten back together again, and Governor Kemp is one of the country's great governors, and President Trump and he have made up. They're getting together, and everything is hitting on all cylinders there. But the key thing that came out yesterday was the Detroit News poll in Michigan, which has Donald Trump up again. Trump 45, Harris 44. So it's a toss-up. But Harris had established a lead, I believe, outside the margin of error, and it's gone, which is consistent with my view that her campaign stalled out and began to fall behind rather dramatically after the CNN non-interview interview because she couldn't hit a softball. All right, she could not hit a softball. I've got some evidence for this, but that's where we are with 6 days to go before the one debate, and I don't think there'll be a second debate. And I'll talk to Senator Vance about that. The vice presidential debate will be interesting. It's not going to move the numbers much. I think Governor Walz is becoming a buffoon sort of character that may also act as a lead weight on Kamala Harris. But mostly it's Kamala Harris, the fake accent in Detroit that was gone by Pittsburgh over the weekend. And our legacy news media is very slow to update you on this. But there is a stall out in the Harris campaign, and there's no way for her to restart it except the debate. Right, so in the debate, she's going to try very much to get Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is going to try very much to get Donald Trump to make a mistake. With that in mind, I want to go to what I said to Larry Kudlow on yesterday's program when he came to me to talk about the debate I was on with Kudlow on Fox Business yesterday, along with Rich Lowry and Grover Norquist. We were doing a roundtable on a bunch of things. But Larry Kudlow is an old friend, right? He used to be on once a week, long before there was Kudlow and Company on anything, before he went to the White House for 4 years with President Trump, before he started his Fox Business show. Larry and I have been friends for a long time. So he came around to me to talk about debates. Let's play cut number 23.
Hugh Hewitt, we broke a little news tonight because Mr. Trump will speak Thursday before the New York Economic Club. I expect that to be hard-hitting, and it bridges to the debate. But Hugh Hewitt, feel free. Give him some debate advice or give him some New York Economic Club advice, Mr. Hugh Hewitt. What are you thinking?
Well, let me focus on the debate because I don't know economics the way you do, Larry, and I don't know foreign affairs the way that Robert O'Brien and Brian Hook do, but I do know how to do debates. And what the former president ought to do is nothing when she is speaking. She cannot communicate. The great communicator had that gift. Now, I've been lucky to work for Nixon, for Reagan, to have interviewed W a few times, Donald Trump a lot of times. Each of those men had different skill sets, but they were all had a skill set. I don't think Vice President Harris has the minimum skill set necessary to be president. And she will demonstrate that if he simply stands there and lets her babble for 90 seconds or cut it off and does not rise to any bait, no matter how juicy it looks, no matter how much he is tempted. Say nothing about her. She cannot win on her own speed. In fact, I think she's peaked. I do believe she's peaked. Now, how do I know she's peaked? I want to show you evidence of desperation. Yesterday, Kamala Harris posted this tweet. All right, let's put up the photo for those watching on the Salem News Channel. Donald Trump vows to be a dictator on day one. That's what she put up yesterday. Donald Trump vows to be a dictator in red on day one. And Kamala's Twitter team, X team, put on top of it, we won't let him. All right, let's go. What is that based on? Man, Donald Trump vows to be a dictator on day one. That's like Halloween jump scare stuff. Let's go back to what that is based on. It's not based on anything, really. There's no reality behind it. But cut number 24, the former president sat down in Iowa in a town hall with Sean Hannity on December 5th of last year, cut number 24.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's
drill.
That's not.
No, no.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be. You know, he keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no. Other than day one, we're closing the border, and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator."
So I want you to understand that's what Kamala Harris posted her tweet about yesterday. And she expects to win the election with that and with a fake accent. That is why the polls are dropping. Now, when I say, as I did to Larry Kudlow, that she lacks the minimum skill set necessary to be president, I've been blessed in my life. My first campaign was for Jerry Ford. I didn't know Jerry Ford. Never got to talk to Jerry Ford. I just liked him from afar. I got to shake his hand at a rally. I was in college in 1976. I ran Youth for Ford, part of the Ford campaign in Massachusetts, a forlorn charge, if there ever was one, because, you know, he got blown out. But doing the thing you do in college, get involved in campaigns. I did get to know Nixon very well from 1978 to 1980 in his exile in San Clemente. And when he moved back to New York, I went with him. Then I went to law school. Then I went back and built the Nixon Library at his request in 1989 after the Reagan administration. So I got to know former President Nixon very well indeed. I worked for former President Reagan in the White House for Fred Fielding and Dick Hauser, one of 7 lawyers, and did not know President Reagan well at all. I got to shake hands with him a couple of times. But in those days, if you were a 28-year-old lawyer, you might be smart, but nobody asked your opinion on anything. They told you what to do. And I didn't get asked anything important. And the smart guys in that office did the work. But then after I was done and back in California and the Nixon Library was open, President and Mrs. Reagan asked me to come up to Century City and talk about libraries. And I spent a couple hours with them. So I got to know the former president a little bit then. I have interviewed W a half dozen times. I've sat down with him at length, as did Dwayne. One day we talked to him in Bel Air about his art book, and we've done interviews on the air about the various books he's done. I've done interviews with him setting in stage. And former President Trump, I don't think anyone's done more in-depth interviews with the former president than I have. Before, during, and after his presidency, and I hope during the next presidency. He's been on the show as recently as 2 weeks ago today. And I can say they all have different skill sets, like I told Larry. But they all had the minimum skill set. That minimum skill set. All right, so what is it? No one's asked me that yet. I'll tell you what it is. It is the ability to take in a lot of information, to decide what needs to be decided immediately and in the priority in which it must be decided, and then to decide. Moreover, to decide the right thing. When they all make mistakes, every president makes mistakes. All you have to do is look at our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln. And he made a mistake with McClellan. He made a mistake with Hooker. He made a mistake with Meade. He made a mistake with Burnside. He made another mistake with McClellan. He hired McClellan twice. He finally got around to Grant. So it took him 5 swings before Lincoln found someone who could prosecute the war. Even our greatest president makes mistakes. They all do. But you have to arrive in the office with the ability to take in a lot of information, not just a little bit, a lot of information. You have to make sure that you've pressed your staff on what the options are, and you have to have a knowledge basis on which to execute judgment. She does not have the knowledge basis. Moreover, she does not have the ability to communicate to the staff or the American people what she is doing. She lacks a minimum necessary skill set. We know Donald Trump can be president. You might not like him, but we know he can do it. I like him. You might not like him. He can do the job. She cannot do the job. That's the monologue for today. We got a lot ahead on today's show. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, Matt Continetti joins me to talk about what's going on in Israel in the aftermath of the execution of 6 hostages. I want to expand a little bit more on my view that Kamala Harris has stalled out. And when I say stalled out, I mean she has got no momentum and she's falling. Nate Silver, who is no Republican, all right, he's no longer with the New York Times. He runs 538. And he forecasts based on all the data. And yesterday's forecast was that Donald Trump has a 55% chance of winning. Not that he's up in polls 55, but that Harris has a 44% chance of winning. That's not a toss-up anymore. 50-50 is a toss-up. That is significantly changed from August 14th. And so it has not been that long. It's been 20 days. 20 days ago, Harris had a 56.7% chance of winning, and Donald Trump had a 42.7% chance of winning, according to Nate Silver, doing all of his various metrics. That is completely flipped around by the end of the month. Trump, 55%, Harris, 44% chance of winning. That's not polling. It's a forecast, right? Like when you, 55% chance of rain today, take an umbrella. Donald Trump is getting the umbrella. 44% chance of rain, you might leave the umbrella at home. Kamala's leaving it at home. Moreover, state by state in Pennsylvania, Trump, 55% chance of winning. Nevada, Trump, 55% chance of winning. Arizona, Trump, 65% chance of winning. Georgia, Trump, 64% chance of winning. Moreover, the Poly Market, which is a betting service, I believe, not sure about that, Trump, 50% chance of winning. Harris, 48% chance of winning. That's all turned around in 2 weeks. I date it all to her. I'm going to quote Abe Greenwald again. Interviews are her kryptonite. Right? Interviews, she cannot do them. The American people see that she cannot do them, and they are worried. Meanwhile, the market nosedive yesterday. Market update brought to you by our friends at AmericanFederal.com. Call them at 800-221-7694. The price of gold dropped yesterday to $2,514 an ounce, as all across the markets weakened. They got bad economic data yesterday. The Dow was down 1.5%. The S&P was down 2%. NASDAQ was down 3.25%. I don't want to look at my 401k this morning. And the 10-year Treasury is at 3.815, which is good news for home buyers. I got to call Andrew and find out what the rate is on reverse mortgages. But gold, as I said, 2,514. Now, I believe everyone ought to own some gold and some dirt. If you have the assets, some of you I know are just trying to make it through the day, and you're not buying assets. But if you need to buy assets, if you want to buy gold, or if you need to sell gold because this economy under Joe Biden is so awful and prices have gone up so much and your wages have not kept up, you sell your gold to our friend Nick Grovich and his team at American Federal. 800-221-7694. Nick knows what he's doing. Been doing it for 40 years. If you want, you can go and do collectibles with him as well. And he's got all that stuff. He'll talk. He'll be a nerd, a coin nerd with you if you want. Nick the coin nerd. And there are lots of coin nerds out there, and he does that. But mostly, he's in the gold business. He sells you gold. He buys your gold. He gets a commission on it. The more you buy, the less the commission. The less you buy, the more the commission. That's what I want you to know. I also want you to know, because J.D. Vance is coming up later today, and I may ask him, and Matt Continetti coming up after the break. And with Matt, I'm going to talk about this. But I want you to know that Project 2025 is not Donald Trump's. If you want to know what Project 2025 is, go to 25truth.com. 25truth.com. This show counts proudly among its sponsors, the Heritage Foundation. They are running 25truth.com to make sure everyone knows what's in Project 2025. They were making fun of it yesterday. The media is attaching to Project 2025, trying to staple it onto Donald Trump's forehead. They were doing that on the Ruthless podcast, and I laughed. I had to laugh because it's a useful document to find out what conservative think tanks are thinking. It's got nothing to do with Donald Trump. Go to 25truth.com. Let me begin with the presidential race before we move to the far more ominous situation in Israel. And I think it's ominous because of the message that has been sent to Sinwar. I'll come back to that. But I have been arguing since the end of the CNN debate that stalled out the Harris campaign. It's been falling since. The data is beginning to come in to fill in with me, and I have been stealing shamelessly from Abe Greenwald, who said on the podcast, interviews are her kryptonite. I think she's got to get out there and do interviews to arrest her fall, but do you think she will?
I don't think she will do many interviews, Hugh, for exactly the reason that Abe mentioned and you just mentioned there, that interviews are her kryptonite. Interviews don't serve Kamala Harris well. Kamala Harris is best served when we're talking about vibes, when we're talking about personality and emotion. When you look at her favorable ratings, her personal favorability has spiked since she became the presumptive nominee in August, and but her job approval is about 7 points lower in the polling averages. So if you focus on the facts, if you focus on the policies, if she's made to answer for her past positions and her future policies as a possible president, I think voters will sour on Harris. She needs to keep it vague, abstract, and just about emotion and how warm and likable she seems to be.
She ought never to have done the Dana Bash interview then, Matt. And I've got to say, in the radio business, I've been doing this since 1990, there's a term called P1s. Those are your program's everyday listeners, and sometimes they listen longer than the average time spent listening to TSL. So your P1s for politics are you and me and the guys on the commentary pod and the folks who write editorial. The P1s know her faults, but America generally didn't like her very much before she got the nomination from an obviously incapacitated president. Do you think that the Dana Bash interview marked a moment, followed by the made-up accent moment in Detroit, where they began to remember what they thought?
I think so. I mean, I think one reason why Harris had been so unpopular was that, one, she was tied to an unpopular president. Two, she had had a terrible debut interview with Lester Holt of NBC News in 2021. And three, after that interview, she really went to ground. I mean, she did not do many interviews. She did not do anything to really change um, the impression of her among the public for years. Now, what's happened was when she became the nominee of the Democratic Party, Democrats had like this mass psychic episode where they just let out this sigh, this gigantic sigh of relief. I mean, you could still hear the wind blowing through the trees from all the relief among Democrats that they don't have to go to November with Joe Biden as their nominee. And that led to this kind of spike, this amazing vertical line jump in Kamala Harris's personal approval ratings. The challenge for the Trump campaign is to remind the American people, look, she's still tied to this unpopular president. She still has not really repudiated many of her far left radical policies from when she ran in 2020. She told Dana Bash her values are the same. There's new reporting out today, Hugh, saying that her campaign has not disavowed her former openness to reparations for slavery. I mean, this is a 70-30 issue against reparations. Her campaign is also being very coy about whether Kamala Harris still supports an electric vehicle mandate. That is, only electric vehicles available to the American consumer in the next 10 to 15 years. So there's still room for the Trump campaign to pin her down, to define her as a far left radical who has served in an incompetent and failed administration. They have 62 days to do that.
I don't think she has the minimum skill sets to be president, Matt. And I explained to some House guests this weekend, she doesn't have a clue on what to do about China. I really genuinely don't believe she understands what it is, the threat that it poses. The Washington Post has a huge story today on how China has been running an influence operation in San Francisco. There's a new story about China corrupting Governor Hochul and Governor Cuomo. Do you think Kamala Harris has a clue about the threat that the CCP poses?
Well, she hasn't given us many signs that she understands the threat posed by the CCP or what a Harris administration might do about it. I was struck, Hugh, over the weekend by her reaction to the murder of the 6 Israeli hostages. She sent out a written statement that was quite strong against Hamas and said Hamas will pay, and blamed everything on Hamas and the murders of these 6 hostages on Hamas. But then when she was out and about doing the events with Joe Biden and then her solo event, she dropped the Hamas will pay language. I think the problem with Harris is she doesn't really know her own mind, and she's often torn between different camps of advisors internally. Remember, she's got her trusted advisors, she's got some Biden holdovers, and she also has the Obamans who have come in now and tried to recreate the 2008 magic with Harris as the candidate. She has these differing camps of advisors, but she's also always concerned about how her comments will be perceived by the broader public. That makes her very cautious. And the net product of all of this internal deliberation and indecision is kind of a muddle, a mess. And it's not clear where she stands on a lot of issues. And when you think about what's necessary for commander in chief, well, what's necessary is clarity. What's necessary is vision. What's necessary is toughness. I don't think the Harris campaign has done very well in making the American public think she possesses any of those attributes.
You know, Matt, I was on with Kudlow yesterday, and Larry asked me for what my advice to Donald Trump is, and it's very simple. Don't say anything when she's talking. Make her use all of her time. Say nothing, never take the bait, because I don't think she has the minimum skill set. And by that, I mean the key thing for a president. I worked very closely with Nixon. I knew Reagan a little bit. I've interviewed W a lot. I've interviewed Donald Trump more than any other person in the world. And I've been on a debate stage with him. They can take in information, assess it, prioritize it, and make a decision. You might not like their decisions. W decided to go into Iraq. I liked it at the time. It was a mistake. But they act on information. I don't know that she has the capacity to, this is an intellectual question. I mean, she's clearly not compromising like that. I just don't think she works very hard. I don't think she has a knowledge base. She grew up in Berkeley, went to high school and junior high in Montreal, went to Howard in D.C., and then went back to San Francisco. The world in which she grew up, the milieu in which she was raised, was not an intellectual milieu open to ideas and data. And that's why I don't think she has the minimum skill set. And she can't communicate. Do you think, let me put it differently, what would be the consequences of a 4-year Harris presidency in your view, Matt?
Well, I think the consequences of a 4-year Harris presidency would be bad for the country, bad for the world. I mean, just look at the state of things now, Hugh. We have more active conflicts going on around the globe than at any time since the Second World War. We have a mess in Ukraine. We have a mess in the Middle East. We have a mess with the Houthis. We have China ramming Philippine ships. We are treaty allies with the Philippines. We are pledged to the defense of the Philippines. We have China threatening Taiwan. So we have a very dangerous world. And then you think about the consequences of the Harris presidency domestically. I'll be frank, I don't believe anything she says when she talks about reversing her far left possessions. Now, you talked about the ideas prevalent in the Harris household. I do think there were ideas. Both of her parents were professors, but I think those ideas were left wing. I think she grew up in the Bay Area among college professors at Berkeley and Cal and the Bay Area, SFU and such. And those ideas are pretty radical. I think that's the milieu in which she came of age. And I think that's where her base is. That's where she retreats to intellectually. The whole California
I agree,
vibe,
Matt. It's
right?
also the most anti-Israel place in the country, in my experience, is the Bay Area. Let's go to Israel now. We have a pretty good 360 view, not into the cabinet meetings, but into the debate within Israel. We know the debate in the United States. What we don't know is Sinwar's mind. He's a psychopath, he's a sociopath, and he's a murderer who we couldn't possibly understand. But he absorbs news. What do you think his reaction is to the reactions to the execution of the 6 hostages?
Well, I think to the extent that he's aware of what's going on, he's pleased. He's pleased that the reaction of the Western world and of much of the Israeli peace camp and the broader Israeli left treated the murder, the atrocity perpetrated against these hostages as something that Bibi Netanyahu was responsible for. And that is a complete moral inversion. Hamas is responsible for everything that has happened since October 7th. And Bibi is in a position where he has acceded to the U.S. bridging proposals, what they call it, that would lead to a ceasefire. That was just 2 weeks ago. What happened? Well, Hamas rejected that bridging proposal, just like Hamas has rejected every single ceasefire proposal since last November. And instead of putting the onus of responsibility where it belongs, on Hamas, we have this U.S. administration, the Harris-Biden administration, and you know what? Her name should come first now because she's probably more in charge than anyone. That we have this administration blaming Netanyahu for what's happening. That's completely wrong.
I think the killers in the tunnels got one message, which is it pays to kill hostages, because all of a sudden, all the pressure went back to Netanyahu. all of a sudden the deal that Netanyahu accepted 100% from Biden. I heard you say 8 offers accepted. I think John Podhoretz counted 9 yesterday. Whatever, Israel's always said yes. And I think Sinwar got the message that it pays to kill hostages. Is that putting it too harshly, Matt?
I believe he's always thought that, Hugh. And the fact remains that the way that we've been getting the hostages out since the initial deal back in November is by rescuing them. That's how you're going to get these hostages out, is by rescuing them. Hamas is not going to give them up. And what we've seen in these crimes over the past week is that when you get close to rescuing the hostages, if you don't pull it off, Hamas will kill them, because Hamas believes that these hostages are the only remaining leverage they have. It's despicable. It's disgusting. But what it means for the United States is that we need to be on Israel's side and to provide Israel all the means, military, intelligence, diplomatic, moral, to finish this job and to defeat Hamas and to find Sinwar and to kill him.
And then to go north. Matt, I have Senator Vance coming up next hour, and I prepared an outline of questions. I'm not going to play this until after he's been on, because I don't give my questions away, and I don't think they're softball. I want to know, first of all, what you think of my opening question, and then what you would like asked. My opening question is, does it matter that Governor Walz went to China 30 times? And do we need to know the details of those trips and his relationship with the CCP? Is that a good question? Is that one that needs to be asked?
I think it's a legitimate question. I'm not sure that Senator Vance will have the answer, but I am sure he'll agree with you, Hugh, that this is a question that needs to be asked. There's a lot of Governor Walz's background we just don't know, that we're just unfamiliar with. And this particular aspect of the background, his relationship with China, all of the travel he did there, who paid for the trips, what was going on the trips, I think that's legitimate to want to know when you're talking about someone who could be the next vice president and potential president of the United States.
The reason I'm going to ask him is in order to elevate the question in the media so that it might get asked at the debate. What would you ask Senator Vance yourself if you were talking to him this morning, Matt, and you wanted to elicit from him news?
Well, what do I want to know from Senator Vance? I want to know what he's found most challenging about running for president or running for vice president, and whether he feels as though his message is really getting out there. You know, he's given a lot of interviews, Hugh. Senator Vance is very accessible, but his approval ratings have not really gone up to match the success, I think, of his communications campaign. So I'm wondering if he feels that that's a challenge and what he thinks he might want to do to improve his standing among the American people, or whether he even thinks that's necessary, because I do think he's performing the main role of a running mate, which is to be the attack dog, very well.
Yeah, I do not believe anyone votes for vice president. I do believe vice presidents can make news, which is why I'm starting with Walz China, but I will ask him about that. I'm also going to ask him about what I perceive, the Harris Walz interview. It was such a bad interview, and Dan is my friend. But the obvious question is, was Israel justified in attacking Lebanon preemptively? Would they be justified in attacking Iran preemptively if Iran prepares another attack? Those were obvious questions, Matt. They didn't get asked. I'm going to ask him that. Do you think the legacy media is redeemable at this point? Because Dana is about as good as it gets in the legacy media world. She went after J.D. Vance with a meat hook, and she just threw softballs at Kamala Harris. Is it possible for legacy media to be seriously fair anymore?
I don't think so. I think if you just trace the events of this calendar year and look at how the mainstream media institutions went from saying Joe Biden's doing fine, and when the Wall Street Journal publishes this article raising questions about his condition, everyone else in the media comes down on the Wall Street Journal news reporters, to saying that Joe Biden should maybe think about stepping down, to saying that if Joe Biden doesn't step down, he's going to be, the criminal in American history, going to be treated as a criminal, to when he does step down, saying, now he's George Washington. And then when you look at the mainstream media,
you know what? You just gave me a new first question. Are we in a constitutional crisis? Because I think we are, Matt. I think we're in a constitutional
Well,
crisis.
I
Have you
agree.
done
And
that?
then look at how the media went from saying Harris is a liability to now Harris is the best thing since sliced bread. So
Well said.
these mainstream media don't have any credibility.
Mary Catherine, before we do anything else, I want to talk about the Travis Manion run because
Yes.
you've meant to talk about it for 3 weeks in a row and you forgot. So let's start there. Tell us about the Travis Manion Foundation and the run.
Sure. So we do a run every year, a 5K called the 9/11 Heroes Run that you can sign up for at 911heroesrun.com. And it's a wonderful thing that brings together civilians, families of the fallen, veterans, and first responders to hang out together to remember 9/11, to remember the heroes of that day, the people that we lost, and in the wars subsequent. And it's a really good time. It's a wholesome time. It will make you feel good about the country, which is something that's like sort of hard to come by during election season sometimes. So 911heroesrun.com. We have them all over the nation and all over the world. I'll be running in Northern Virginia with all my kids, I guess. I got to find a stroller to put 2 of them in. And and so we're going to be out there doing it. If you join us, you will love this group. You will meet a bunch of great people. It is a wonderful way to honor the fallen and to think about the people who sacrificed for this country. So 911heroesrun.com. Did I say it enough? Like a book plug?
No, you need to say it 7 times, according to Frank Luntz. In Words That Work, he says, if you want anyone to remember anything, you have to say it 7 times. So 911run.com. Did I get it right?
911heroesrun.com.
9, is there a slash between the 9 and the 11, or is it 911heroes.com
No.
without any? Okay,
No
911 Heroes Run. I'll write it down.
Yeah.
911heroesrun.com, and it's all over the country on different dates, right?
That's correct. Ours is September 22nd in Northern Virginia. I will be there, and it'll be a good time.
Travis Manion Foundation is a fabulous group, and Mary Catherine's been working with them for years. When I go down to watch and no longer participate in the Marine Corps Marathon, they always have 2 groups stand out, Semper Fi Fund and the Travis Manion Fund. Mary Catherine, I just asked Matt Continetti, and I'm going to also ask you off air. I've got J.D. Vance coming up, and I have a question set ready, and I don't give them away. Dana Bash is my friend. I'm sure she's your friend as well. I was very disappointed with that interview because I thought it was all softballs. What did you make of the interview?
Yeah, I thought she didn't follow up in the ways that one would hope. I also can I make another Dana Bash point, which is in this discussion about Arlington Cemetery. She was interviewing Tulsi Gabbard, and she talked to her about Trump being at Arlington, and she went really hard in the paint, harder than she went on many Kamala Harris and Tim Walz questions about Trump's presence at Arlington and whether it violated this rule. And Tulsi Gabbard said, hey, what I saw was this solemn observation. These families asked him to be here. It was important to them. They wanted video and photos of it because their loved ones have not gotten attention. And Dana Bash said, well, I understand that they invited them to honor these people who died about 2 years ago. And Tulsi Gabbard immediately said 3 years. She said 3 years ago. And that to me is an encapsulation. I don't mean to just go after her. That is an encapsulation of this conformity culture in media where they are just sort of ignorant of the Afghanistan withdrawal facts and of the impact that had on the veteran community, to families of the fallen, to the 13 families that were involved. If you don't know that happened 3 years ago while you're doing that interview, it's a problem. And it reflects.
Let me give you an adjacent anecdote. When Tom Cotton was on Meet the Press with another friend of mine, Kristen Welker, this weekend, she interrupted the senator to say Kamala Harris was at the dignified return of remains ceremony in Dover. She wasn't. Senator Cotton didn't rebuke her because he did not know. I've confirmed with Team Cotton. He was 80% sure that the vice president wasn't there, but he didn't want to say it. That's adjacent. Again, Kristen's my friend. But there is this conformity culture. I know where it comes from because I worked at NBC. Whenever anyone in the legacy media says anything remotely pro-Trump, they get hammered by the Beltway insiders on the left. And I mean hammered, Mary Catherine. Did you experience that ever at CNN?
Oh, of course. I mean, just thinking that Russiagate probably wasn't true, which, it turned out I was right. and urging my colleagues not to jump to all these conclusions was considered basically having a third eye in the middle of your forehead, right? So there is a problem here, but it bothers me when there's real pain when it comes to school closures or the Afghanistan withdrawal, when there are real victims who are hurt by an administration they happen to align with. That doesn't mean those victims don't exist, but to them, that's what ends up happening. They erase children who didn't get to go to school because they don't want to hurt Randy Weingarten and the Biden administration. They erase the families of the fallen from the Abbey Gate disaster because it's inconvenient to the Biden administration to talk about that. And they've been left out of every State of the Union. Their names have never been spoken by Biden or Kamala Harris, to my knowledge. And they are now getting attention because of this, I think, fake outrage about Trump. But I'm glad those families have a spotlight on them, at least a little bit, because those.
Oh, it's the Streisand effect. Mary Catherine, you know that before any serious interview, a host will do a lot of work to try and make news. That's my objective. Get something that is newsworthy that Dwayne can type up, we can put on the website and push out. So I am going to start my interview by asking about Tim Walz's 30 trips to China and whether J.D. Vance intends it to be an issue. Matt Continetti brought to my attention two other things. What does he find most challenging about the campaign? Does he think his message is getting out? And are we in a constitutional crisis? Because we kind of are, because Joe Biden really isn't there. And I think no one doubts that anymore. What would you ask J.D. Vance if you were in my chair in 30 minutes?
Well, clearly I'm sort of exercised about this Arlington story, so I feel like I would maybe ask him about the Abbey Gate families and this dust up, which strikes me as just like such a cynical line of coverage by press and is actually disrespectful to the families. So there's that.
How would you phrase that, Mary Catherine? Help me out a little bit. How would you phrase that?
Why you gotta get me out of bed and ask me tough questions, Hugh?
I got this is in 30 minutes. I got a list, but that's a great question. How do I phrase the Arlington question?
Ooh, dang it! I'm gonna have to text you later, Hugh. I don't know. The other one I was gonna give you is boring because I'm interested in the tariff policy and like how you argue.
Oh no, never, no. We're not going to talk about tariffs on the Hugh Hewitt show. God forbid. Mary Catherine, that's like death on wheels to the audience, right? You know
that's why I gave you the first one, because I was like, oh, he's going to hate this tariff question.
What would you, if I run out of time, if JD's doing, what some interviews go south, they go yes, no. And so you're if I'm gasping for air, what do I ask about tariffs? Because I hate tariffs unless they're directed at China.
Right. So here's the point of the tariffs question, which you can take it a different direction. You can ask him about Kamala's insane price gouging argument, which leads to but I think the real question is, again, we're getting into policy and it gets more boring, is how you actually do bring prices down for people. But I'd love to hear him take a shot at this insane price gouging theory from her.
Oh, well, yeah, interesting. The answer is very easy to me on bringing down prices, and we'll close here. If you produce more energy and you drive down the cost of energy, you drive down the production of food cost, and you drive down the transportation of the food to the supermarket. So we need to overproduce energy so that the world, all one market. And I don't know that Democrats understand it's all one market. And the more that we produce, the more. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't think they understand markets at all, or strategically ignorant so that they can do what they want to do. Yeah.
Well, that makes it better. I'll tie it to price gouging because tariffs, by the way, will raise prices, correct?
Right. Yes. Well, and that's what I'm concerned about is you don't want to end up hurting people that you're trying to help, which is, I don't want to give Republicans credit for only intentions, just as the press is always giving Democrats credit for only intentions, right? You want to investigate what your policies are actually going to do for people.
Now, I remember Trump put tariffs on aluminum early in his administration, and I was hell on wheels on that because it was such a dumb policy. We don't get aluminum from China. But tariffs on everything from China, I'm okay with. It will force the market to find alternative sources of supply for whatever we are getting. The people who aren't in favor of that's Apple, right? They can't get out of China. They're trapped.
Yeah, And it's a pretty dirty scene with the way that they do business there, as is often the case doing business in China.
One good, one not so good, but I got 9 questions for JD, and 2 of them are from you, and 2 of them are from Matt Continetti. So thank you, Mary Catherine. Everyone,
hone this first question for you.
The Arlington visit is a very good question. I will do that. I'm joined by Akash Chogali, who is the Vice President of Americans for Prosperity. Akash, good morning. Got any questions you want me to ask JD Vance?
What I want to know from JD Vance is how this next administration plans to tackle the various fiscal challenges we are facing next year. The Trump tax cuts expiring, the debt limit deal, the ACA subsidies expiring. Spending is why we have an inflation crisis. We want to know how they're going to get it under control.
I will put that on the list, but that's pretty deep policy, Akash. I was going to go after the price gouging nonsense from Kamala. What do you think of that, by the way? What is she proposing in your mind? I think it's a nightmare. I think it means price controls, but she's doubled down on it. What is she talking about?
To be clear, Hugh, I'm not sure that she knows what she's talking about. What the American people need to know is that idea has failed every single time it has ever been tried in the history of the world. And that sounds very hyperbolic. It is absolutely true. It's been tried in socialist, communist countries all over the world, and it has never worked because it breeds corruption, black markets, lack of supply. I mean, you need only look in this country at healthcare and higher education as 2 examples where the government dumps billions and billions of dollars into a system to try to improve it and make it more affordable. And what they end up doing is reducing quality, making it more expensive and more inaccessible for people who need those services. And they'll
Akash, I worked for former President Nixon in his retirement in San Clemente, 1978 to 80, and then I oversaw the construction of his library, and I went back to helm the foundation for a few years. So three tours of duty with the former president or his foundation. And I know about price controls because Nixon tried it in 71, doubled down in 73. They were abject failures. And they had smart people working on it, like Bill Simon and George Shultz, and they had Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld. You cannot make price controls work because the market operates on bazillions of decisions by individuals, not on government bureaucrats. How many times do we have to learn this lesson?
Yeah, it's amazing, Hugh. Like I said, we have examples over and over again in history. And I think you make a very important point, which is that our economy functions on trillions of individual decisions made by individuals, families, businesses, meeting people's needs, deciding what they want, what they don't want. It is functionally impossible for unaccountable bureaucrats in Washington to micromanage the economy, no matter which party or how smart the person is who is president. It is impossible for government to micromanage the economy in that way. What's going to happen is ultimately we're going to see what's happened in California, which is that we're going to see housing prices go way up, price the middle class out, and you're ultimately going to see a shortage just like we have in other areas of our economy where this has been tried.
When Kamala Harris says, I want to give new home buyers $25,000, I think it's the worst idea I have ever heard because it is an inflation setting unnecessary jolt to the housing market. And 2, it's not enough to do anything in most places where there's a housing shortage. What did you think of that proposal, Akash?
The other thing that's very ironic, Hugh, is that she's now talking about making housing more affordable, when in fact, it's her administration's policies that have made it so expensive to begin with. Housing was, to be fair, already very expensive, but look what they've done with this inflation crisis. Materials for housing are more expensive. Labor for houses is more expensive. The other inputs that you need are more expensive. Everything is more expensive because of this administration's inflation crisis, and that includes building and buying a home, Hugh. Pouring $25,000 per home buyer into the economy is only going to jack prices up even further. We know this idea is terrible. What I want to know, Hugh, is do Senate Democrats running for re-election, do they support this idea in their home states? Does Jon Tester think this is a good idea in Montana? Does Sherrod Brown think this is a good idea in Ohio? Bob Casey in Pennsylvania? Do they think this is going to make life more affordable for people in their states? I think we deserve to know,
Akash,
do they agree with this?
The media, our friends in the legacy media will never ask Bob Casey in Pennsylvania or Sherrod Brown or Jon Tester or Ruben Gallegos any of those questions. So it's up to us to educate. That's why AmericansForProsperity.org is a sponsor of this show. That's why they are in all of the swing states. Have you noticed an uptick in volunteers and people joining on with AmericansForProsperity.org, Akash, as we get into the home stretch here of 62 days to the end of the election?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There continues to be enthusiasm, and I think, frankly, Hugh, concern. I think the American people know that the biggest threat to the future of our country is full Democratic control. It's a Harris White House, Democratic-controlled Senate, Democratic-controlled House. We are active, like you said, in every swing state, making sure that these radical Senate Democrats who are running as moderates but voted for the failures of Bidenomics, have done nothing on the border, that they are held accountable. And yes, absolutely, we're seeing an increase in enthusiasm because they understand the threat that's at stake with a Democratic trifecta.
So if you're in a swing state or not, because you can also help in a swing state from anywhere in the United States by making calls, et cetera, go to AmericansForProsperity.org. Nonpartisan, but they are always in favor of whoever's in favor of a free market. Now, I want to go back to housing, Akash, because you know this stuff pretty well. The illiquidity in the market, the reason that there are not enough homes available for sale for first-time homebuyers is because during the Trump years, interest rates got to 2%. A lot of people are sitting on 2 to 3% mortgages, and they cannot move. The only way to get them to move up, as is traditionally the case, you buy your starter home, and then after 5 to 7 years, you buy a second home when you've got 2 babies, that, et cetera. That's not happening. We have a big wrench in the works because of that interest rate bubble, the consumption of houses under that interest rate. How do we get interest rates down?
We need to get spending under control first, Hugh. Interest rates are kind of a blunt tool to deal with inflation. I think people have to cast blame on the Fed. I think some of that is fair, but ultimately it was a blunt tool to deal with a crisis of Congress and the administration's creation. I think until we do that, it's very, very unlikely that we see interest rates come back down anywhere close to where they were during the end of the Trump administration. I don't think it's realistic to expect 2.5% interest rates, but if we can get spending under control and get inflation under control, then I think we could start seeing rates tick down again to something even remotely more reasonable to make home buying more affordable.
The 10-year Treasury right now, on which most interest rates for home purchases are based, is at 3.81%. What do you think that ought to be in a healthy economy, Akash? I think it should be about 2.5% in a healthy economy.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's generally accepted, somewhere in the range of 2.5%. But again, so many things have been thrown out of whack, Hugh, and these numbers can get very complicated for the average American. But I think at the end of the day, they know things are more expensive. And I think the inflation crisis, what we're alluding to, is hitting people in more ways than one. Not only are day-to-day things more expensive, gas, groceries, things like that, but things that require credit are also more expensive. The ability to buy a home, the ability to buy a car, the ability to make these kind of capital investments, if you will, in your family that are integral to the American dream, right? They go beyond these day-to-day expenses. Those things are out of reach for people. I think that's very, very unfortunate. It's important to know why that's the case. Interest rates went up. These prices went up. Credit card debt is way up because the Democrats, when they had full control, spent an additional $6 trillion supposedly to help the American people. Really, all they were doing was vote buying from their various sort of special interest constituencies, and the rest of us are left paying for it. I think they deserve to be held accountable for it, and Americans deserve to know the truth.
It was inflation dynamite. If you spend $6 trillion, if you print $6 trillion, the number of goods don't go up. Do you think this basic proposition is understood by voters? You cannot just spend money. We've always known that, but Joe Biden threw it out the window because he wanted to be FDR. Do you think the American people have learned we cannot do that?
I actually do think so, Hugh. You and I have talked about how hard it is to make the case to the American people on reckless government spending, but I think that problem has touched them more directly in the last four years or so than it has maybe ever, or at least since the era you're talking about, the 70s, the Carter era, things like that. But yeah, I think when we get to people's doorsteps all across this country, they get it. They see that, yes, maybe it wasn't the only issue. There were supply chain factors and COVID disruptions and things like that. But ultimately, it was the spending that dumped trillions into the economy, did nothing to increase supply. And that's why prices are up 20% since Biden.
Akash Shoguli, thank you. Go to AmericansForProsperity.org. Get in the fray, get in the fight. You can help from wherever you are. Doesn't matter which of the 50 states we are in that you hear this. Go to AmericansForProsperity.org and get in the fight. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. JD Vance coming up at the bottom of the hour.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by AmericansForProsperity.org.
If you listen to the air check that we do every day after the show, that's available only to people who are Universe subscribers. You know, I always yell at Dwayne over putting Corinne Jean-Pierre cuts on my run sheet. He did it again today, so I'm going to play
that's
it.
Factually untrue. It's a slander.
Let's get to cut 25
You
first.
said cuts plural. It was one.
Okay, there is.
In the president's public comments, why is he harder on Benjamin Netanyahu than he is on the terrorist leader of Hamas?
The president has been very, very clear about Hamas leaders and what they have done. He was very clear on October 7th. He has been very clear multiple times thereafter on what Hamas has done. And they have, they are, it is a heinous murder.
That is the 1/1,000,000th example of her being the worst press secretary in the history of press secretaries. So why did you put that on my cut sheet?
Just for sheer entertainment value.
I don't want any more KJP.
Well,
she will never get another job in the White House. She will never get another job, as far as I know, because she's just awful.
She'll get a job. She'll
at MSNBC.
She'll be on MSNBC in a week.
Yeah, but she's just so bad. I don't like to make fun of her. Remember Scott, the worst until this time, the worst press secretary in White House history.
We make fun of Kamala Harris, and she's just as bad at her job.
Yeah, but she could be in another job that affects you and me. Okay, since you're here, let's plug myphdweightloss.com. 864-644-1900. That's
864-644-1900.
A sponsor of our show, My PhD Weight Loss, actually works. It is a non-drug alternative to Ozempic and all the other drugs that cost you $500 to $1,000 a month for the rest of your life. MyPhDweightloss.com is what Dwayne took up 2 years ago and a month and lost 50 pounds on and has kept it off. It's not rocket science, but it is discipline, and it is a counselor-led program.
It's an accountability program. You have to be accountable to your nutritionist at My PhD Weight Loss. And if you don't, you start to feel a little guilty because you're not doing your end of the deal.
And you're not going to Weight Watchers in front of a circle.
No.
It takes 15 minutes to check in and to ask questions and to organize around the specifics of your life. And it works.
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
MyPhDweightloss.com. Now, I added a cut to today's greatest hits. I have a lot of Kamala greatest hits. I got a new one today. This is from 2017. Kamala Harris at a National Democratic Institute saying the following, cut 26.
I come from a long line of tough, trailblazing, and phenomenal women. My grandmother would go into villages in India, and because she was Indian and lived in India, and she would go to the villages in India. It was a famous story in our family. My grandfather would say she was going to be the end of his career, but my grandmother would go into the villages with a bullhorn, talking with the women about the need to have access to reproductive health care.
Okay, I don't know what to say about this other than
she must have been in the life of the party.
It reminded me of Elizabeth Warren, the high cheekbones Cherokee story. This is a family story. All right, that is always the giveaway to me. In our family, it was X. And, we have no way of knowing, right? We just don't know. But I want you to know that's Kamala Harris, 2017. My grandmother was out there pushing for abortions in India 50 years ago. All right. I don't think India did abortions 50 years ago. I don't know, but I sure wish someone in the media would follow up with the vice president. My first question goes to the tragedy and the horror of this weekend. 6 hostages executed by Hamas, one of them American, Hirsch Goldberg Pullen. What is your reaction to what Sinwar ordered his terrorists to do?
Well, obviously, first, our hearts go out to the innocent people who are affected, especially an American citizen. I think it's despicable. It's also, frankly, entirely predictable. We know who Hamas is. We know the problems they have. We know the fact that they felt emboldened by Kamala Harris's policies, and we know they've been enriched by Iranian money that has flown to them because of Kamala Harris. So this is not unexpected, and it's going to keep on happening unless we fix this.
Second question, Senator. The same question that I asked you was asked of Governor Walz at the Minnesota State Fair. He was answering questions. He had answered 2 questions. The third question was his reaction. Not only did he not answer, he turned and walked away. What does that tell you about Tim Walz?
Well, I think it tells us that he's a little too close to Hamas. This is something we've known about Tim for a long time, that he hosts Hamas sympathetic people in his state. He clearly is terrified of alienating the pro-Hamas wing within his own party. And this is a guy who I think is terrified of expressing real condemnation of what Hamas has done, because he knows that if he does so, he might alienate a lot of important voters for his constituency. And I'm proud to stand with the Republican ticket, of course, led by Donald J. Trump, where we can express clear moral condemnation and not worry about the political consequences of saying terrorists are bad guys.
When you say he's a little too close to Hamas, that's very provocative. How big do you think the pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party is, as opposed to, say, the pro-Palestinian wing?
Well, look, I think that there are clearly a large segment of the Democrats' base. I mean, is it 2%? Is it 5%? It's certainly far bigger than it should be, that has expressed explicit sympathy with Hamas. And, of course, it's more common in certain important battleground states. And given the margin of those states is sometimes 0.5%, 1.5%, I think they do feel like they can't cross that Hamas sympathetic wing of their own party. Now, I also think that there are a lot of people who are just willfully blind to what's going on in Gaza, willfully blind to Israelis' interest and, of course, America's national interest. But I actually do think there are some people who have expressed explicit sympathy to Hamas. We got to call that stuff out and be cognizant of it, because it is unfortunately a growing and not a shrinking force in our politics.
There is another problem with Governor Walz. He made 30 trips to China. There are in this morning's news, this very morning's news, 2 stories. Washington Post, how China extended its repression into an American city. And in the New York Post, ex-Hochul and Cuomo aide and husband worked as foreign agents for China, splashed out millions on mansion, Hawaii condo, and Ferrari, say the feds. Do we need to know the details of Governor Walz's trips and his relationship with the CCP?
Yeah, Hugh, I think we do. I mean, look, over 30 trips to China as the guy who chose to do his honeymoon in China, and of course, echoed some CCP talking points in his instruction materials after he returned from China. So, look, I don't know if the guy just had a soft spot for China. I don't know if there's financial interest there. But as you know, Hugh, anybody who's been to China that many times is absolutely targeted by Chinese intelligence. Whether they were ultimately successful, I'm not going to say they were, but we ought to ask some difficult questions about why Tim Walz seems so preoccupied with China. And look, what he said publicly is far worse than any suspicion we might have about what he's done privately, because this is a guy who's expressed a view that China is not an adversary, that we should get closer to them. And this is, of course, over a time period where China has built its entire industrial base by stealing good middle-class manufacturing jobs from Americans, making America less self-reliant, making us more reliant on our chief adversary. I'm less worried about what Tim Walz has done in his private life in China, and much more worried about the fact that he and Kamala Harris are pursuing policies that will make China more powerful, which, of course, will make our own country weaker.
Senator, we had House guests this weekend, and they're very smart. And they asked me why I was so concerned about Vice President Harris becoming president. My answer was, I believe that if she is president for 4 years, the United States will lose its superpower status as a peer to the CCP. We are not near peers. We are peers. They have more Navy ships than we do. They have hypersonics, et cetera, et cetera. Do you fear China that much, or am I an alarmist?
No, I think you're exactly right, Hugh. I mean, look, they have pursued a very aggressive and, let's be honest, a very smart strategy of building natural resource relationships all over Africa and Latin America. They, of course, have pursued a very robust technology and manufacturing policy, and they recognize something that, frankly, a lot of American Democrats forgot, that military power is downstream of economic power. And if you destroy the industrial base of this country, we're not going to be able to win the war of the future, God forbid, when and if it comes. So, yes, I think China has about 31% of world manufacturing GDP. America has about 19% of world manufacturing GDP. They are on the rise, and America has to change course. And I don't think that we can survive 8 years of Kamala Harris while still being the world superpower. I do think that, at best, we will be a peer with China after 8 years of Kamala Harris, and maybe worse.
Now, I was on earlier with Matt Continetti, who I believe to be maybe one of the most significant rising intellectual figures in the United States on the conservative side. I asked him, what would he ask you? And he wanted to know if you are frustrated at your message not getting out. You are very good at delivering the message, but it does not seem to get out. Are you frustrated, and why do you think it's not getting beyond the interviews? I mean, you've been everywhere. You've talked to everyone, but it doesn't seem to get out. Are you frustrated? Is that legacy media? What do you think?
No, it's a good question, but I'm not frustrated, Hugh. I mean, look, we recognize the mainstream media is never going to be fair to me and Donald Trump. That's why we give the interviews that we do, is because we want to go everywhere, talk to everybody, and that includes long-form podcasts or hostile CNN interviews. But if you look at the numbers, and frankly, the internal numbers are a little bit better, Kamala Harris's momentum has clearly stalled. The American people are slowly waking up to the fact that she's a San Francisco liberal who wants to take soft on crime, ban fracking policies nationwide. And we have 63 days to carry that message out there and to get it out there. I'm not frustrated because I've always recognized the media is going to be dead set against us, but this is why we have a campaign, and this is why we go and do the things that we do, because we believe the American people are smart. We believe that we can be honest with them about Kamala Harris's lack of a vision. And if we are, they're going to elect us and give us the opportunity to fix the country's problems.
Now, Senator Vance, Dana Bash is my friend. I worked with her on 4 debates in 2016. I recommended her to the RNC when Salem and CNN jointly presented for debates this year, and I assured them that Dana could be fair. I was very disappointed by the interview that she did with Kamala Harris and Governor Walz, and especially when contrasted with the interview that she did with you. Do you believe that was Dana, or do you believe that was CNN's editorial process? What happened there? Because Kamala and Walz got underhanded softballs, and she was throwing fastballs at your head.
Yeah, look, I certainly blame Dana for that, Hugh, and I agree with you about her. I like her. I respect her. But I think she really missed an opportunity to follow up on some very important questions, right? She asked Kamala, why did she change her mind on pretty much every issue? And then she gave her a multiple choice answer instead of pushing. Like, what actually changed? What have you learned? What have you sort of understood in leadership? Like, actually explain to the American people why you wanted to ban fracking, defund the police, open the border, and now you allegedly don't want to do any of those things just after a few years. I also think she missed an opportunity, Hugh, to really push Kamala on why aren't you doing the things that you want to do right now? Because you're the vice president of the United States. You could be pursuing these policies immediately, but you're not. And I think she really let Kamala off the hook and really run away from the fact that Kamala isn't just running to be president. She is the sitting vice president and has been for 3.5 years.
There were obvious questions that should have been asked that weren't asked. I'm going to ask you now. Number one, that interview, the Bash Harris Walz interview, occurred 5 days or so after Israel preemptively struck Lebanon and took out many Hezbollah launchers before they fired. Did Israel have the right to do that, Senator Vance?
Well, look, Israel's being attacked repeatedly, often from Lebanon, Hugh. It has the right to defend itself, and I certainly think it has the right to strike sites where rockets are being launched against its citizens. So, yes, I do. And I think there's a bigger and broader issue here, which is what is in America's best interest? And I think it's really important for us to rebuild the Abraham Accord peace process that if it comes to fruition, Hugh, it will serve as a counterbalance to a rising Iran acting as a regional hegemon. You talk about focusing on China. What we want is for Israel and the Gulf states to be able to provide their own check on Iran. And unfortunately, what Kamala Harris's policies lead to is a war that weakens Israel, that prolongs Hamas as a fighting force, and doesn't allow Israel to build the diplomatic process that will empower not just Israel, but America's interests in the region.
Iran is the head of the snake in the region. Does Israel have the right to preemptively strike Iran if Iran prepares a second attack? They attacked Israel directly in April. The United States helped fend that off, as did Britain and Jordan and Egypt. But if Israel sees a second attack on them forming up in Iran, do they have a right to strike Iran preemptively? Oh, the phone dropped. Well, we'll get him back because that question needs to be answered, and we have a 20-minute window. So that was probably cell phone click. He must have moved the cell phone. There, he's back. I can see him calling in. And so, hey, Senator Vance, the question was, does Israel have the right to strike Iran preemptively as they did Hezbollah if they see Iran forming up a second strike directly at Israel, as happened in April?
Well, Hugh, here's how I think about this. Whether Israel has the right, to me, it's not something I focus on international affairs. I focus on what is in Israel's interest, what is in America's best interest, and Israel is our ally. And if they choose to take an action that they perceive is in their best interest, that's ultimately their decision. It's not our job as the United States to police what they do for their own security. I've never liked the language of right in international affairs. If Israel feels like it has to strike to protect its citizens, I'm much more likely to defer to Israel than to Iran. Of course, the details matter here, but I don't think we need to be policing Israel's behavior and how they defend their own people.
Senator Vance, I want to ask you about the Arlington Cemetery visit by President Trump with the Gold Star families. I believe it was appropriate. I believe it's been cynically manipulated by the media. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you, Hugh, but let's step back for a second. The main thing that Donald Trump allegedly did wrong is that he appeared in images where there were grave sites at Arlington. So, has Joe Biden done the exact same thing? Yes. Did John McCain do the same thing when he was running for president? Yes. So I think this is a scandal that has been made up by the media to cover for the fact that Kamala Harris didn't show up, that the Gold Star families are pissed at her, and they have every right to be angry at her because their loved ones are dead. No one has been fired because of it, and Kamala Harris bears the responsibility both for the lack of accountability but the underlying disaster.
I also believe it's appropriate to ask you now, Senator, you were a Marine. There is a recruitment crisis in the United States, updated today at news items. It's staggering how far 3 of 4 services are missing their marks, and the Marines made their mark largely because they've downsized the Marines. Will you and the former president be able to reverse that recruitment crisis? And if so, why? Could Kamala Harris do so as well?
Well, we're going to have to, Hugh, and I certainly think it's going to be a goal of President Trump's in mind. I don't think Kamala Harris can do it because we have a recruitment crisis for 2 reasons. First of all, people don't want to put on the uniform and potentially sacrifice their lives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll do it for the United States of America. And I think their focus on progressive politics at the expense of what unites us as Americans has actually alienated a lot of working and middle-class kids from the mission of the military. The second thing, Hugh, is they fired thousands of dedicated veterans for refusing to take the COVID vaccine, even though COVID, of course, was not dangerous at all to a 21-year-old Marine who's in great shape. So I think if we get some leadership back in there and we cut out the ridiculous progressive crap in the military, we can re-inspire that patriotic sentiment that motivates people to join the military. But it's not going to be easy.
Let me ask you now 2 more questions. In terms of the Kamala Harris, do you think she has the minimum skill set necessary to be president? I was worried that if Hillary won, she would have ruined the Supreme Court forever. But now I'm worried. Kamala Harris does not have the minimum skill set. As Abe Greenwald, a commentary, said, kryptonite, interviews are her kryptonite. Do you think she has the minimum skill set to be president?
No, I don't, Hugh, and I think this is a critical problem for her. 2 points. One, she's obviously terrified of interviews. She can't speak off the cuff because she doesn't have her own set of values, her own set of ideas about how to govern the country. And so if she goes off script, it becomes a disaster. But there's actually a deeper issue, Hugh, which is that she can't keep good staff. The presidency is bigger than any one person. You have to staff an entire federal government. She had 92% turnover as the vice president, way, way higher than Donald Trump, way higher than even Joe Biden. How can we trust her to staff a government if she can't even staff her own office as vice president of the United States?
Are we in a constitutional crisis? Because I believe President Biden is incapacitated.
Well, I think we're in a constitutional crisis in 2 ways, Hugh. First of all, we increasingly see evidence that bureaucrats in the Biden administration have promoted censorship of their political opponents. But you also, of course, have a president who clearly can't do the job. I mean, he went on a 40-day vacation, shows up to give one speech with a teleprompter at a rally with Kamala Harris, and I think, frankly, scared everybody, Democrat or Republican, about whether he can actually do the job. This is a real scandal, Hugh, and it implicates Kamala Harris directly. Why did she lie to the American people for 3.5 years about whether this guy could do the job? She saddled the United States with a president who is unable to do what is necessary to discharge his constitutional responsibilities. If that isn't a constitutional crisis, I don't know what the term means.
I agree. Last question. Kamala Harris wants to go after price gouging. I hear price controls. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know what she's thinking about. How do you react to her proposals on price gouging and price controls?
Well, we've heard price controls before in this country and everywhere else. It fails every time it happens. It means you're not able to buy flour. You're not able to buy eggs in the grocery store. That's what price controls do. Now, Hugh, I'm under no illusion that every American corporation is somehow an angel. Sometimes corporations don't always do the right thing. The way to solve that issue, Hugh, is competitive markets. And what Kamala Harris has done with her green policies that favor certain industries over others is actually destroyed the competitive marketplace that keeps some of our businesses from doing the wrong thing. She has caused this inflation crisis with her policies, and now she wants to fix it by waving the magic wand. The only thing we need to do is boot her out of office, bring back common sense energy and economic policies. That will solve inflation. Competitive markets solve inflation. You don't solve inflation by having a government bureaucrat determine what price you're allowed to sell something for.
Well said, and thank you, Senator, for the extra time. I appreciate your sticking around. Press on and come back soon.
Thanks, you. Take care.
Let's go play part of the interview where we dropped off and came back during break. Welcome back, America. I'm still joined by Senator J.D. Vance. Senator Vance, I want to ask you about the Arlington Cemetery visit by President Trump with the Gold Star families. I believe it was appropriate. I believe it's been cynically manipulated by the media. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you, Hugh, but let's step back for a second. The main thing that Donald Trump allegedly did wrong is that he appeared in images where there were grave sites at Arlington. So, has Joe Biden done the exact same thing? Yes. Did John McCain do the same thing when he was running for president? Yes. So I think this is a scandal that has been made up by the media to cover for the fact that Kamala Harris didn't show up, that the Gold Star families are pissed at her, and they have every right to be angry at her because their loved ones are dead. No one has been fired because of it, and Kamala Harris bears the responsibility, both for the lack of accountability, but the underlying disaster.
I also believe it's appropriate to ask you now, Senator, you were a Marine. There is a recruitment, because we're going to run out of time. I will play the rest of that, just so the audience who just tuned in figure. Senator Vance joined me at 33 minutes. We were allocated 20 minutes by the campaign. We got disconnected, so it gave me some time back, and therefore I wasn't able to play all of the interview in this segment. I will play the rest of it next hour. All of it will be posted on HHS links, on Twitter, on YouTube, and at HughHewitt.com, because I want you to hear. He's very, very good at messaging. And the only reason you haven't heard that is that legacy media is very, very bad at being balanced and fair. How many minutes do we have left of the interview, Adam? Is it about like 2 minutes of it? So I will find a place in the next hour. I'll probably short Eric Hovde in the third segment of the next hour to play the balance of it. But Dwayne will transcribe and post it at HughHewitt.com. You can find it at my YouTube, and it gives me a chance to tell you, if you aren't subscribed to the Hugh Hewitt YouTube channel, you ought to, because it is my practice to put up my monologue and my interviews, all of them, at the Hugh Hewitt YouTube. And my podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh, puts forward all of the substance of the day's show in highly concentrated form. So I cut out the fun stuff and the offbeat stuff and the everything else, and we just give you the show minus commercials over at the podcast. Not the whole show, but it takes a few hours to get it posted and up there, and some of you need to be informed. If you're wondering about the two articles that I referenced to Senator Vance, the one from the New York Post, ex-Hochul and Cuomo aide and husband worked as foreign agents for China. It's not the only time China has done that. The CCP is literally everywhere, and we've got to wake up to what 30 trips by Tim Walz means, as I discussed with Senator Vance. I just finished talking to J.D. Vance, and I'm going to play for you the end of the interview that you did not get to hear because of the disjointed way that happened. Here's the setup. The senator was scheduled for 33, and I was given 20 minutes. Those are the rules, and that's fine by me. We lost the connection, probably because he's traveling. He called back immediately, and we continued. So he gave me extra time, but it did complicate the presentation of the interview to you. It was a bit disjointed. Here is the end of the interview that was taped off air, and then we came back live on air and began to play the off-air part. Dwayne is transcribing and posting the entire audio as it occurred as we speak, but here's the end of my conversation with Senator Vance, and I'll come back with some commentary. I'm going to ask you now, Senator, you were a Marine. There is a recruitment crisis in the United States, updated today at news items. It's staggering how far 3 of 4 services are missing their marks, and the Marines made their mark largely because they've downsized the Marines. Will you and the former president be able to reverse that recruitment crisis? And if so, why? Could Kamala Harris do so as well?
Well, we're going to have to, Hugh, and I certainly think it's going to be a goal of President Trump's in mind. I don't think Kamala Harris can do it because we have a recruitment crisis for 2 reasons. First of all, people don't want to put on the uniform and potentially sacrifice their lives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll do it for the United States of America. And I think their focus on progressive politics at the expense of what unites us as Americans has actually alienated a lot of working and middle-class kids from the mission of the military. The second thing, Hugh, is they fired thousands of dedicated veterans for refusing to take the COVID vaccine, even though COVID, of course, was not dangerous at all to a 21-year-old Marine who's in great shape. So I think if we get some leadership back in there and we cut out the ridiculous progressive crap in the military, we can re-inspire that patriotic sentiment that motivates people to join the military. But it's not going to be easy.
Let me ask you now 2 more questions. In terms of the Kamala Harris, do you think she has the minimum skill set necessary to be president? I was worried that if Hillary won, she would have ruined the Supreme Court forever. But now I'm worried. Kamala Harris does not have the minimum skill set. As Abe Greenwald, a commentary, said, kryptonite, interviews are her kryptonite. Do you think she has the minimum skill set to be president?
No, I don't, Hugh, and I think this is a critical problem for her. 2 points. One, she's obviously terrified of interviews. She can't speak off the cuff because she doesn't have her own set of values, her own set of ideas about how to govern the country. And so if she goes off script, it becomes a disaster. But there's actually a deeper issue, Hugh, which is that she can't keep good staff. The presidency is bigger than any one person. You have to staff an entire federal government. She had 92% turnover as the vice president, way, way higher than Donald Trump, way higher than even Joe Biden. How can we trust her to staff a government if she can't even staff her own office as vice president of the United States?
Now, Senator, we're at our limit, and I got to go back on the show. And you promised me 20 minutes, and I don't keep people longer. I'm curious. I want to ask you if we're in a constitutional crisis. Do you have a moment to stay longer to ask
Please.
about that? All right. So that's everything is now aired, and it will be all transcribed. The audio is already posted at HughHewitt.com, and then Dwayne is transcribing. It was 18 minutes long, maybe 19, and we lost him there. I had 20 minutes, but I didn't want to take him past the top of the hour. I had another interview lined up. So here's what you need to know about interviews. You can ask a lot of direct questions in 20 minutes. You can ask a lot of very pointed direct questions in 20 minutes, and someone who knows their own mind can answer them. Kamala Harris cannot do that. Governor Walz has not shown the ability to do that. And legacy media has evidenced no desire to show them what a real interview is and to hold them to the kind of minimum standard that even a friendly, and I'm friendly to JD, I consider him a friend. I've known him since he put out Hillbilly Elegy. I moderated a debate fairly. I mean, I don't take sides when I moderate a debate. I moderated a debate with 5 other candidates besides JD, along with Aaron Baer from the Citizens for Christian Value in Ohio in the Senate race that JD Vance won. And I've been a guest on this show many, 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 many times. And he's a graduate of The Ohio State University. I do not hold Yale Law School against him. So I am his friend, but I still have to do my job, which is to ask the obvious questions. So that's why I did show prep today with Matt Continetti, which I'm going to play for you now. Here's what I talked about with Matt Continetti off air and did not play beforehand because I do not give candidates the questions. All right, I don't do that, and I do not shy away from taking advice. The very first question that I asked came from, believe it or not, Dwayne, and then I used the Continetti question, and I got to the Mary Catherine Ham question because I was doing show prep right up until the moment that Senator Vance came. I took input. That's what happens, by the way, at NBC and CNN, is that 40 or 50 people. So here's what Matt Continetti and I talked about off air that I did not play because I did not want to give any clues to Senator Vance's team as to what I would be asking. I am back now with Matt Continetti of the American Enterprise Institute and Commentary Magazine, the Washington Free Beacon. Matt, I have Senator Vance coming up next hour, and I prepared an outline of questions. I'm not going to play this until after he's been on because I don't give my questions away, and I don't think they're softball. I want to know, first of all, what you think of my opening question and then what you would like asked. My opening question is, does it matter that Governor Walz went to China 30 times? And do we need to know the details of those trips and his relationship with the CCP? Is that a good question? Is that one that needs to be asked?
I think it's a legitimate question. I'm not sure that Senator Vance will have the answer, but I am sure he'll agree with you, Hugh, that this is a question that needs to be asked. There's a lot of Governor Walz's background we just don't know, that we're just unfamiliar with. And this particular aspect of the background, his relationship with China, all of the travel he did there, who paid for the trips, what was going on the trips, I think that's legitimate to want to know when you're talking about someone who could be the next vice president and potential president of the United States.
The reason I'm going to ask him is in order to elevate the question in the media so that it might get asked at the debate. What would you ask Senator Vance yourself if you were talking to him this morning, Matt, and you wanted to elicit from him news?
Well, what do I want to know from Senator Vance? I want to know what he's found most challenging about running for president or running for vice president, and whether he feels as though his message is really getting out there. You know, he's given a lot of interviews, Hugh. Senator Vance is very accessible, but his approval ratings have not really gone up to match the success, I think, of his communications campaign. So I'm wondering if he feels that that's a challenge and what he thinks he might want to do to improve his standing among the American people, or whether he even thinks that's necessary, because I do think he's performing the main role of a running mate, which is to be the attack dog, very well.
Yeah, I do not believe anyone votes for vice president. I do believe vice presidents can make news, which is why I'm starting with Walz China, but I will ask him about that. I'm also going to ask him about what I perceive the Harris Waltz interview. It was such a bad interview, and Dan is my friend. But the obvious question is, was Israel justified in attacking Lebanon preemptively? Would they be justified in attacking Iran preemptively if Iran prepares another attack? Those were obvious questions, Matt. They didn't get asked. I'm going to ask him that. Do you think the legacy media is redeemable at this point? Because Dana is about as good as it gets in the legacy media world. She went after J.D. Vance with a meat hook, and she just threw softballs at Kamala Harris. Is it possible for legacy media to be seriously fair anymore?
I don't think so. I think if you just trace the events of this calendar year and look at how the mainstream media institutions went from saying Joe Biden's doing fine, and when the Wall Street Journal publishes this article raising questions about his condition, everyone else in the media comes down on the Wall Street Journal news reporters, to saying that Joe Biden should maybe think about stepping down, to saying that if Joe Biden doesn't step down, he's going to be, the criminal in American history, going to be treated as a criminal, to when he does step down, saying, now he's George Washington. And then when you look at the mainstream media,
you know what? You just gave me a new first question. Are we in a constitutional crisis? Because I think we are, Matt. I think we're in a constitutional crisis.
I agree. And then look at how the media went from saying Harris is a liability to now Harris is the best thing since sliced bread. So
well said.
These mainstream media don't have any credibility.
Mary Catherine, you know that before any serious interview, a host will do a lot of work to try and make news. That's my objective. Get something that is newsworthy that Dwayne can type up, we can put on the website and push out. So I am going to start my interview by asking about Tim Walz's 30 trips to China and whether J.D. Vance intends it to be an issue. Matt Continetti brought to my attention two other things. What does he find most challenging about the campaign? Does he think his message is getting out? And are we in a constitutional crisis? Because we kind of are, because Joe Biden really isn't there. And I think no one doubts that anymore. What would you ask J.D. Vance if you were in my chair in 30 minutes?
Well, clearly I'm sort of exercised about this Arlington story, so I feel like I would maybe ask him about the Abbey families and this dust up, which strikes me as just like such a cynical line of coverage by press and is actually disrespectful to the families. So there's that.
How would you phrase that, Mary Catherine? Help me out a little bit. How would you phrase that?
Why you gotta get me out of bed and ask me tough questions, Hugh?
I got this is in 30 minutes. I got a list, but that's a great question. How do I phrase the Arlington question?
Ooh, dang it! I'm gonna have to text you later, Hugh. I don't know. The other one I was gonna give you is. The other one I was going to give you is boring because I'm interested in the tariff policy and like how you argue.
Oh, no, never. No. We're not going to talk about tariffs on the Hugh Hewitt show. God forbid. You know, Mary Catherine, that's like death on wheels to the audience, right? You know
that's why I gave you the first one, because I was like, oh, he's going to hate this tariff question.
What would you, if I run out of time, if JD's doing, what some interviews go south, they go yes, no. And so you're if I'm gasping for air, what do I ask about tariffs? Because I hate tariffs unless they're directed at China.
Right. So here's the point of the tariffs question, which you can take it a different direction. You can ask him about Kamala's insane price gouging argument. Which leads to but I think the real question is, again, we're getting into policy and it gets more boring, is how you actually do bring prices down for people. But I'd love to hear him take a shot at this insane price gouging theory from her.
Oh, well, yeah, interesting. The answer is very easy to me on bringing down prices, and we'll close here. If you produce more energy and you drive down the cost of energy, you drive down the production of food cost, and you drive down the transportation of the food to the supermarket. So we need to overproduce energy so that the world, it's all one market. And I don't know that Democrats understand it's all one market. And the more that we produce, the more. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't think they understand markets at all, or strategically ignorant so that they can do what they want to do. Yeah.
Well, that makes it better. I'll tie it to price gouging because tariffs, by the way, will raise prices, correct?
Right. Yes. Well, and that's what I'm concerned about is like you don't want to end up hurting people that you're trying to help, which is, I don't want to give Republicans credit for only intentions, just as the press is always giving Democrats credit for only intentions, right? You want to investigate what your policies are actually going to do for people.
Now, I remember Trump put tariffs on aluminum early in his administration, and I was hell on wheels on that because it was such a dumb policy. We don't get aluminum from China. But tariffs on everything from China, I'm okay with. It will force the market to find alternative sources of supply for whatever we are getting. The people who aren't in favor of that, Apple, right? They can't get out of China. They're trapped.
Yeah, and it's a pretty dirty scene with the way that they do business there, as is often the case doing business in China.
One good, one not so good, but I got 9 questions for JD, and 2 of them are from you, and 2 of them are from Matt Continetti. So thank you, Mary Catherine. Everyone,
hone this first question for you.
The Arlington visit is a very good question. I will do that. That was a very good question. I used it. That's how you do show prep. I believe your race is getting close, and I believe that on a number of different factors. But you tell us, what is the situation in the race against Baldwin?
Basically, the race is a neck-and-neck race right now. We've had 3 internal polls. We've had the Emerson poll that had me down 1 point. So it's anywhere to tied or down 1 or 2 points, which is great, given that they've spent $35 or $40 million hitting me. They've probably spent more money attacking me than any of the 11 Republican Senate candidates on a population or per capita basis. So the campaign's going well, and we're just pointing out how flawed a candidate she is. I mean, she's one of the most extreme liberals. Think of Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and yet she masquerades as a somewhat moderate back in the state and votes very different when she's in Washington, D.C. and hanging out there.
Now, Eric Hovde, would you explain to me why pollsters can't get Wisconsin right? I like to remind people, and Brett Baer gets tired when I bring it up on Special Report. A week before the 2020 election, the ABC Washington Post poll, and I work for the Washington Post, so I hate saying this, but it was the ABC Washington Post poll, had Joe Biden beating Donald Trump by 17 points. In fact, Joe Biden won by 0.63%. So that's not a mistake. That's not an error. That's a malfunction. That's a terrible result. Why do pollsters have such a difficult time getting a good beat on what's going on in Wisconsin?
I think there's a variety of reasons. And Hugh, if you look at 16, the polls, multiple polls in October had Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton beating President Trump by like 6.5%. Obviously, he won that year. And multiple polls in October of 20 had him losing by like 7%, and he lost by, as you said, less than 1%. So I'll give you a few different reasons. One, you really can't trust polls that well anymore for these 2 reasons. One, private sector people that tend to vote for Republicans are harder to poll than public sector employees that vote for Democrats. And Democrats are trying to manipulate polls. So you've got hyper pollers, Democrats that will poll and take every call. So it skewers that. Secondly, in Wisconsin specifically, a lot of farmers and rural people, they're out on the farm. They're hard to reach during the day, and when they come home at night, they're tired. So they're not polling at the kind of rates that you would usually think. And lastly, what's unique to Wisconsin, I'm in Madison. Think of Berkeley, California, one of the most extreme liberal spots. And if you call somebody and you don't know who that person is, and they ask you, are you voting for Donald Trump? They're not going to tell you. And you have pockets of Milwaukee that same way. So our state is a center-right state. 6 of our 8 congressional seats are Republican. Our state Senate supermajority, and our assemblies almost supermajority. So I think President Trump is probably winning the state right now.
I think he's going to win the state too. And I tell people you can't trust any Wisconsin polling because it's the equivalent of what was known as the burned over district in the 19th century. Evangelists went to Western New York and they had revival after revival after revival. So the great then evangelist Charles Finney said, that's burned over, that's burned out. We can't go do a revival there. Wisconsin's been like at the epicenter of American political division for a dozen years. Is that about right, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, we are truly probably the most purple state. Again, we're center right, but we go back and forth, back and forth. Our governor always goes back and forth. We've got one of the most conservative senators, Ron Johnson, and then Tammy Baldwin, one of the most liberal. But if I can win, this could really change the course of things. And look, me and President Trump are linked together. There's no question about that. I'm trying to help him. He's trying to help me. But this is the battleground. The Democrats have spent more time, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris here, because they know they cannot win this election if they lose Wisconsin. So I plan to take out Senator Baldwin, but look, I need all the help I possibly can. So if any of your viewers or listeners are watching, please help support me because, they have money coming, hand over fist. Senator Baldwin raises money from big tech, big pharma, Wall Street. I'm not taking special interest money. Part of our problem in our political system, it's become corrupted and bought off. And, I'm raising.
Let's tell people the website. EricHovde.com, HOVDE, Eric, ERIC, Hovde, HOVDE.com. You have a very easy website. That's going in your favor, and people can donate there. And that's the best donation, right, is directly to the website that you run, EricHovde.com.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I want to know if Senator Baldwin is campaigning with Kamala Harris, because I think Kamala Harris is stalled out and is plummeting, and I've got a lot of reasons to believe that are fact-based, not just wish casting. What do you think? Is she showing up with Kamala?
It's so funny about Senator Baldwin. The week before Joe Biden blew up in the debate, she said he's the most accomplished president in generations. Then he blows up in the debate. She wouldn't be seen with him, wouldn't answer questions whether she supports him. Then when they pick Kamala, then she's all in for her. She did go to one event with her, but it'll be interesting to see what ends up unfolding. I agree with you, Hugh. I don't see how we have a presidential candidate that is literally not taking questions from the press. I mean, we've never seen this before. They're trying the strategy what they did with Biden, run him from his basement. But this time you don't have COVID to hide under. And at some point in time, she has to explain her views. So I think the shine's going to come off of her pretty quickly. We just got to stay talking about the issues that matter to the people of this country. Inflation.
That brings me to price gouging. I don't think it exists. But when dairy farmers hear that, or the community in Wisconsin that manufactures hear that, do they understand that means price controls and that they're going to be told what they can sell their produce for?
Well, I always love it. Senator Baldwin was pushing out, just like Kamala Harris, inflation's because of corporate greed. Well, why is it that corporate greed just all of a sudden took off during their administration? Like, okay, if it was corporate greed, why didn't it happen before that? Or, the 40 years before that? Look, we all know inflation's a monetary event. They printed too much money, spent too much money. And I always like pointing out, well, if inflation is corporate greed, does that mean that the farmers are being greedy because they were passing on increasing prices? Does that mean small businesses were being greedy as they were getting cost push on them? I think most people know that those policies will lead to failure. It'll lead to price or good shortages. And then once they finally have to release it, then inflation will only skyrocket more because you'll wipe out a lot of suppliers. So it's economic, stupidity at the highest level, and it's always failed. It's just like socialism.
Last question.
And it's
last question, Eric Hovde. I want to ask about immigration because Kamala Harris is all of a sudden in favor of a wall. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Does anyone in Wisconsin believe that Kamala Harris will fix the border?
I don't think she is not getting good marks on that. I mean, that's a step too far, Hugh. I just can't believe anybody that would support her. And I always say to people, when you talk to those in the middle, and you got to explain that the Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of 20, 25 years ago. Ask them questions like that. Do you really believe she was the border czar? That means she had all the control, that she's going to all of a sudden now fix the border, that she supports a border wall, even though she didn't before. It's amazing how she has flip-flopped on position after position. It's just absolutely priceless. But as we both know, the mainstream media just covers up for her at every turn.
EricHovde.com, EricHovde.com. Go there and support him. He's going to be a great senator with Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Thank you, Eric. Come back again. I appreciate your time this morning. Carrie Lake is the nominee of the GOP for Senate in an open seat in Arizona. Up against Ruben Gallegos, Carrie Lake joins me now. Her website is Carrie, K-A-R-I, Lake.com, KarrieLake.com. Good morning, Carrie. Welcome back. How goes the race?
Good morning. We are busy here in Arizona. The race is tight. I'm running against a very radical candidate and being outspent probably 10-1. But that is amazing that we're so tight right now, and we've got some assistance coming in. We're starting to hit our ads really strong this week after Labor Day, and we've got other groups that are coming in and putting some ads out. So I feel really good about where we are. Considering he's spent $62 million, both Ruben Gallego and his friends, running ads up until now, and they still have about $35 million ready to spend. It's an expensive race, but the fact that we're holding our own, and a new poll just came out this morning, I guess from CNN, saying no clear winner. It's margin of error, so it's a tied race here in Arizona.
Now, Carrie Lake, I follow this very closely. I just talked to Eric Hovde about this as well. There is a called polling response bias. It's not the sample size. It's who will answer a poll. Pew Research has confirmed polling response bias. I believe it's there in Arizona, but they usually get the issue set correct. Is it economy and border in Arizona?
It is. I look at where are independents and Republicans, and it's economy number one, border, crime and safety. These are the top three. And even with Democrats, it's now economy, and then it's border, and then it's crime, and then it's abortion. So abortion's not in the top five for independents or Republicans. It's moved down to issue number 4 for Democrats.
So, Carrie Lake, people do not know that Ruben Gallego really is a radical. Now, lots of people like to come on the show and say we're running against a very liberal person, and it's true. John Tester is very liberal. Tammy Baldwin is very liberal. Ruben Gallego, I honor his military service. He is a radical. Do Arizonans understand that?
They're about to learn a lot more about it. I've been working hard to get the message out, but again, he's been spending so much money trying to paint himself as, a cross between Mr. Rogers and G.I. Joe, that for people who didn't know who he was, which, let's face it, the whole state didn't know who he was before he ran, he's been able to paint himself as this kind of new character that is not reflective of the way he has voted. He has voted for sanctuary cities, in support of sanctuary cities, against the border wall. He's voted to defund the police. He's voted to have women men play in women's sports. He's voted against the Iron Dome. He's voted in favor of Iran. I mean, his absolute voting record is completely far left. 100% of the time, he's voted with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Not 95% of the time, 100% of the time. And now he's trying to paint himself as a moderate. So we've got to get out there and let people know who he really is. This is a defund the police guy. And we've seen it in the last couple of days, all of the police shootings happening around the country. We just had 2 of our own shot last night here in Arizona, in Phoenix. There is a real war on the police right now, and it's people like Ruben Gallego who have called them the enemy and, has marched in BLM and defund the police rallies. This is the reason we have such disrespect and hatred that's been launched toward our law enforcement, who, let's face it, we need now more than ever with these gangs of Venezuelans breaking into people's homes and taking over apartment complexes. We've got real problems with crime out there, and the people are noticing it. They don't feel safe in their own neighborhood.
Kerry, I want to end on Israel. You're a very strong supporter of the Jewish state, and there's no doubt about that. I don't believe Rubin is, and I think he is not. Richie Torres is a very liberal congressman from New York, but he's also staunchly pro-Israel. I think Ruben Gallego is not. What is the difference between you two on supporting the state of Israel?
It's night and day. I mean, this is a guy, as I said, he voted against funding for the Iron Dome. He's refused to condemn for the longest time the anti-Semitism here on our college campuses, even when it was his alma mater, Harvard. And Elise Stefanik had the president sitting there making anti-Semitic remarks. He has not been supportive of Israel and their launching their defensive on these terrorist cells, Hamas and Hezbollah. He actually was supportive of the Iran deal that Biden made. So it's very night and day with Rubin and me when it comes to Israel. And now, again, he's trying to reinvent himself, just like Kamala Harris is. We can't believe what the Democrats are saying right now.
We can't.
In the last 3.5 years, we've seen what they're capable of. Now they're trying to do a switcheroo, a makeover, a big makeover on their personalities. But we've got a voting record, and we have to look to that to show us how they will behave if they are elected.
Kerry Lake, thanks for joining me this morning. Her website is kerrylake.com. Again, good investment place, because this is going to be a razor-sharp win for Kerry Lake in Arizona, but she needs your help. kerrylake.com. Thank you, Kerry.